We are back with the fallout of the Supreme Court decision that just waved away nearly a century of precedent and massively expanded presidential power. Their ruling that President Trump can fire independent agency heads at will, raising serious concerns about how independent those agencies can be in this new reality. Right now, we're joined by the woman whose name is on this case, Rebecca Slaughter. She was fired by Trump from the Federal Trade Commission. We're also joined by Alvaro Bedoya, who Trump fired alongside Slaughter. It was initially part of her lawsuit. He later resigned from the FTC. It is good to see you both, Becca. You have been the first to say this is not about you. This is about the independence of the FTC. This is about an expansion of presidential authority. But I do have to ask, how are you and how are you processing today's ruling?
Well, I am very sad for America, honestly, first and foremost. I'm very worried about a future where presidents like President Trump can wield this enormous grant of executive power that the Supreme Court just handed to him in order to reward his friends and punish his enemies, and do so with impunity. I think that is incredibly sad. And that's really what I am focused on. I'm also trying to read 100 pages of decision, and it's dense. So that's hard.
That's what that Yale Law School degree is for. You are well prepped for this moment. What does it mean, Rebecca, if all of these agency officials now have the threat of a political firing following every move they make? Which agency are you most concerned about?
Well, I think if you look at the collection of agencies that Congress set up to have these independent, multi-member, bipartisan boards and commission, they have a common thread, and they are agencies that are given really important responsibility to make sure our markets are working freely and fairly, and that the government is not just rewarding the rich and powerful at the expense of everyday Americans. And so what you get with a decision like this is exactly what we've been seeing, for example, at the FCC, where the chair of an agency will wield their power in order to punish speech and try to inhibit free speech, to control the media. It is what you are seeing at agencies across the board. And I think that is what's really concerning. What I'm worried about the most is the way the agencies that are going to use tools that were set up to be applied neutrally, without fear or favor, instead to create enormous fear by wielding incredible favors at the president's behest.
Alvaro, for those who don't know, the FTC's job is to protect consumers from deceptive practices and monopoly power. There is a reason the FTC was designed by Congress to be shielded from politics. What does it mean for American consumers if the FTC is no longer able to operate independently?
That's exactly right. This is the agency that blocked the largest grocery store merger in history that would have made your eggs and beef even more expensive. This is the agency that banned Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro who loved to buy an orphan drug and then jack up the price on it. FTC banned that guy from the pharma industry for life. This is the agency that blocked an attempt to corner the market on some key cancer tests. And unfortunately, all of the people that were helped by those actions are going to lose by this ruling. And the only people who are going to be helped are the president's, billionaire golfing buddies. And unfortunately, I think it's time for people to wake up to the fact that this Supreme Court has become a billionaires fan club, and not a fun one like the Swifties, right? This is the Supreme Court has made corporations people, and they can buy your elections. And if a corporation hurts you, as long as you sign a fine print contract, you can get denied your day in court. And lastly, if the CEO of one of those companies decides to load up on the president's crypto coin to bribe him or donate to the president's weird golden ballroom, the president is totally immune from any kind of bribery accusations. We need to wake up to the fact that today, through what they did to now former Commissioner Slaughter and their ruling in Cook, they're making clear that the Wall Street bankers, the central bankers, they deserve an independent, above the fray regulator. The rest of us schmucks get stuck with the loyalists. That's what's being created today.
It is good to see that you are maintaining your sense of humor even in the darkest of times. I do want to come back to the Fed because you were the first to caution me that this was different, and it was different for a reason. But I want to unpack this with you, Becca, which is the argument that Sauer was making was, listen, the FTC under FDR in the 1930s is fundamentally different than the FTC under Donald Trump in 2026. This is a much more political FTC, and the president should have the ability to fire folks who do not agree with his ideological agenda. You had attorneys on your staff who have attorneys who argued this case who've worked for conservative justices. They didn't buy the argument. Tell me, what is your sort of personal counter to this larger idea that is being put forward by the conservative movement about the president's ability to fire folks who don't agree with him?
So I think we go back to the Constitution, which says that the president shall take care to see that the laws be faithfully executed. That doesn't mean the president should be able to do whatever he wants because he won an election. He has to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And the laws are those laws passed by Congress that include both the powers of an agency and the structure of an agency. The FTC doesn't have to exist. Congress created it, and it created it with a very particular structure for a reason. And it has since created dozens of other agencies with the same structure for the same reason. And Justice Gorsuch in his concurrence points out maybe Congress wouldn't have created these agencies and given them these powers if it had known that the president would be able to wield them unilaterally. I think it's important to note that, yes, the president won the election and should have the power to articulate his policy priorities, but they still have to fit within the law. And so your previous panel was talking about the implications of this decision for rule of law. And I think that is one of the things I'm the most worried about, because it's yet another example of the court saying, go ahead, President Trump, ignore the statute as Congress has written it and has a president signed it, has been honored for over a century, and do whatever you want. And that has real implications for regular people in their everyday lives. And I think Alvaro pointed a little bit about the tech bro billionaires. The image I cannot get out of my head is the one from the inauguration of the president surrounded not by heads of state, not by public servants, not even by his family, but by the CEOs of the richest and most powerful corporations across America, almost all of whom the FTC was in active litigation against at the time of the inauguration. And what I thought then is, thank goodness we have this controlling precedent that protects us from having to jump or say how high if the president says jump to drop this case against my good buddies over here. And I think that that's something that's really, really worrisome.
Well, and Alvaro, that sort of gets at the early caution you offered about why the decision in the case of the Fed was likely to be different in the case of the FTC, that you warned us not to look at it as, some big win for democracy, or that the court was driven by a desire to protect democracy. There were other forces at play. Talk to me about that.
It's a two-sided system of justice. I think with the tariffs case, a lot of people were quick to say, holy smokes, this is a declaration of independence by the court, when in reality what it was the Supreme Court siding with the United States Chamber of Commerce, who didn't like this policy because their big donors and supporters didn't like it either. And what we've had since that decision is the billionaire companies starting to see their refunds, while small business owners, hundreds of thousands of them, have seen nothing so far. And again today, we have this with the Federal Trade Commission. A core part of our job, I frankly think the most important part of our job, was to protect the small business owner. That's what the case against Amazon is about. So, one of those billionaire donors that we were litigating against when the president tried to illegally fire us was Jeff Bezos and his company, Amazon. We alleged that his company was a monopoly, and that when small businesses got on the site, they were squeezed and forced to pay up to 50 cents of every dollar. And so when they got off the site to offer people lower prices because they could make better margins without that 50% haircut, Amazon would kick them out of the buy box. That is being litigated right now today. And unfortunately, it's very obvious that this is going to make it even harder for those small business owners to win in that lawsuit when President Trump is going to be able to just fire the people of the FTC if they're not making the kinds of arguments he likes. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note, this is after the $1 million for the inauguration, the $29 million for First Lady Melania Trump for the documentary about her, untold millions for The Apprentice, and untold millions for this weird golden ballroom that is now where the East Wing used to be.
Becca,
And can I?
we are.
Can
Yeah, I want to give you the
Alvaro's?
last word, but I want to make sure that I get to this part, and then you can add on whatever you want to add on, Becca.
Yes.
Which is, we're in constant search for profiles in courage. And I think you have offered us a profile in courage. I think of the two of you, I'm a parent, we have kids the same age, being at your kids' event when the news of your firing came down. I think of the pizzas that have been delivered to each of your houses while your kids slept in an effort to intimidate you. You have said time and again, you saw this legal challenge as an extension of your oath to protect and defend the Constitution. On the other side of the court's ruling, was it worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did not get into this fight because I was 1,000% confident that the Supreme Court that was willing to take a case overturning a precedent was going to decline to do so. I did it because it's the right thing to do. And I'd 100% rather be on the right side of history than on the winning side of any particular case. And it is unquestionable to me that the people today who are standing up against crony capitalism, against an out-of-control executive, against abuses of power, are going to be shown to be on the right side of history. And to be clear, I think Alvaro's courage is spectacular. I have been incredibly well supported in this fight. And I just would like to take a moment to recognize all the other thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are doing similar acts of standing up for principle, for their oaths to the Constitution as federal employees across the government. And they're doing it with much less recognition and much less credit, and I think much less support. And I think they deserve all of that credit and appreciation as well.
Rebecca Slaughter, Alvaro Bedoya, thank you so much for joining us on what I am certain is a busy day for you both. We are so grateful.